Consciousness is that with which our experience is known. It is that within which everything appears, and it is that out of which everything is made, and of which everything is the activity. I think that's Rupert Spira. I think that is the fullest definition of consciousness that could possibly be stated.
Consciousness just is. I think when we think of isness,
Yeah.
that's just what consciousness is.
Mhm.
I think consciousness is God. And I think that it is what permeates and drives everything to be what it is. I think it is in, through, and all around all things. And it creates all things. It is creation itself. Hey everyone, welcome to Pursuit of Infinity. I'm Josh, and this is Joe. Welcome to the episode. Today we are going to be picking up our metaphysical questions. We got through 42 of them, and it's been a little while, but it's interesting. We've never actually started off any of these episodes by just kind of defining what metaphysics is. So I'd like to ask you, Joe, to you, because I know the definition can probably vary between person to person, but to you, what is metaphysics?
Okay, so to me, I guess I'd say let's look at it. The job of physics is to describe how nature behaves. So metaphysics isn't the description of how nature behaves, but what nature is. So metaphysics is actually what is reality, whereas science that we normally deal with in physics is really the job of it is to describe the behavior of nature and predict future events in reality, that type of thing. Whereas metaphysics is actually answering the question, what is reality? So it's one layer deeper, it's more fundamental to the existence of what reality is. What do you think? Would you agree with that description?
I think I would definitely agree with that description. Yeah. When I think of metaphysics, I just kind of break down the words meta and physics. And as you said, physics is essentially like the description of our material world, in terms of what we can measure and see with the scientific method. And I think about, like, what would it mean to say the meta version of that, like a
Mhm.
level broader than that. So
Right.
it's, as you said, describing what reality is. That's definitely one way to look at it. But you can even look at it as, like, as we always bring up, the holons. It's just like an outer level of the fractal. It might not, like, metaphysics might just be another fractal, and then outside of that there might be another version of something that we might call metaphysics, and you know what I mean, and it could
Right.
probably go on forever. But to me, metaphysics is like reaching past the understandings that physics allows us to reveal, and sort of going one level deeper, or going out one meta level broader.
I think it's also worth saying that, like, I don't appreciate that nowadays, like in our modern culture, it seems like metaphysics is almost categorized as woo woo, or it's not really taken too seriously by a lot of, you know, the famous minds of our time. I think that's changing to an extent, but kind of has a woo stigma around it, or it's not taken as seriously as like hard physics. And the irony of it is that being the case, we are kind of, since we're not like investigating metaphysics and it in its own right, now it seems that like physics and science is kind of stepping out of its bounds and trying to pull metaphysics into it. So like a lot of scientists, instead of, they're getting it mixed up with, instead of uh having their science just describe nature and predict outcomes, they're kind of mixing metaphysics in with their standard physics. You understand what I mean? It seems like they're kind of mixing a little bit in a way that I don't think is correct.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, we're really just too tied to the paradigms that we currently try to understand reality in, and that's just kind of part of the transition between like understanding new paradigms. We're still going to try to understand everything that presents itself to us based off of the tools that we currently have until we can evolve those tools. So
Mhm.
I mean, psychedelics are one way of evolving those tools. Meditation, anything that involves the mind and involves consciousness, and until we can sort of adapt our methods of research to some of those newer, and actually they're not even newer, they're more primitive tools. Um, I think we're still going to be grasping onto that physicalist paradigm that we try so hard to measure everything against.
And, I think, like, psychedelics, as you mentioned, meditation as well, those, in my opinion, are the ultimate metaphysical tools. And, it's those are totally disregarded in the materialist realm or just standard hard sciences. Like, uh, in regular physics, a psychedelic trip bears, no relevance in their minds. So it's, a lot of scientists are using their physics to create their metaphysics, where I think they're kind of skipping over using the proper tools for that investigation.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Um, so now that we sort of have nailed down a little bit of what we think metaphysics is and how we even go about thinking about metaphysics, why don't I go into the next question here and ask it to you? So it is number 43, and the question is there a necessarily existent being upon which the contingent world depends for its existence?
Okay. See, that's an interesting question, the way it's worded and what the kind of assumption I think that is in there. So, reality is, it is contingent upon being, not a being. So, when it says a being, it kind of, I think it's inferring to like a version of God that is some separate other or, entity, like a some type of a what we would call being, where what I would say is the proper way of thinking about it is actually just being itself, capital B being. So not um something with a physical form, but the pure experience of being. So I think reality is contingent upon being. That I think when you go deep and beyond all the layers of what we look at as the physical realm, all down through the layers of our sense perceptions and our thoughts, mind and matter, you get the fundamental thing that is contingent upon reality existing, which is being itself. So, not a being as in a physical form or some type of higher being that, creates reality, like maybe what some would envision as like the Christian God, but being itself, more of what the Christian mystics would uh, acknowledge as God. So, not a being, but being itself, which is our most fundamental experience of reality. It is the closest thing to us. It is us. So, I think that is uh, what reality is contingent upon.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this question. So I'm going to start by defining some of the terms that the question sort of revolves around. So, first, contingent world. I am going to separate contingent world from what you were saying reality is, because I think contingent world is more specific than all of reality.
So, you're saying Earth?
Uh, let's call contingent world the physical reality that you and I experience as humans. And if that is the definition of contingent world, then I think it depends upon the existence of a being because consciousness works through us to create the reality that we're seeing in terms of our perceptions. Um, Now, I'm not saying that the brain is creating consciousness, um, but what I sort of think of it as is again like the like consciousness itself weaves its way into um, a being, and then the projection of reality colored by all of our perceptions is what the contingent world depends upon, because the contingent world or the material world, as we know, we kind of talk about all the time, is more so created by our brain and our consciousness than is something that is outside of us, I think. So that's
Right.
the way I kind of want to approach the question.
Okay. See, yeah, I think that's great actually, because the world as we experience it, this earth and physical realm that we experience is contingent upon our perceptions.
Yes.
So, I was kind of looking at it a different way, but I totally agree with that I mean, our entire experience of the world is simply perceptions, and it's mind and matter, perceptions and thoughts, perceptions, thoughts, sensations. That's you know I th- we have our five senses. That's what we experience the world as. So it's not like a coincidence that we have eyes and we think this is what the world looks like, or if we had an extra sense, if we had a sixth sense, let's call it X, there would be X's out in the world, and we would think that's what the world is. So, yes, it's contingent upon our perceptions, and us as an apparent separate being, um, that, creates those perceptions and then creates the world. So, yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with that. Yeah, it's a good
And
way of looking at it.
the contingent world and its existence also changes according to the type of being that consciousness is inhibiting at the time, or at the quote unquote time.
Mhm.
Because the contingent world of a dog or a bat or a zebra or an ant is vastly different than it is for you or I. So, and that's just all that is just consciousness flowing through a different being. But notice it's a being. So I do think that the contingent world does depend upon a being.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I still think, there is a layer beyond that where I mean, there are definitely multiple ways to look at it. I'll just put it that way. I already stated what I said before, but I do agree that it is contingent upon our perceptions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the difference is how you would define contingent world, and
Right.
then also the existence of contingent world. You know, if you consider contingent world to mean like all of reality, then I think your first explanation of it is
Right.
spot on.
Yeah, and if you wanna separate the, states of being as, like, from the dream state to, altered states of minds, like, with psychedelics, entering other realms like astral projection, stuff like that. I see, but if you include it all together as one, as reality as a whole, that's where I initially came at the question. But I
Yes.
get what you're saying when you really pick apart actually each word and focus specifically on this state, this realm. I see exactly what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Should I read the next one?
Sure.
And what that's is it 44?
Yes. 44.
Okay. Could there be a person who was not in time? Could there be a person that was not in time?
No, I don't think so. Because no matter what, if you are a person, if we're considering person meaning human, then that would be a person that is grounded within this physical reality. And if you're grounded anywhere within the physical reality as a person, not as a being, not as a consciousness, not as a spirit, not as a soul, as a person, then you are in time somewhere. Even
Right.
if you're, because have you heard that thing where people say, like, if there's a person who's in space, traveling at a certain speed for a certain period of time, they won't age or whatever, or like they'll
Right.
age slower than somebody who's on Earth here.
Mhm.
Still, that is in time. So
Yeah.
I don't think that there could be a person in time. Even if you're traveling through time, you're still in that uh that linearity that we're stuck in as a physical being, as a physical person.
Right. And part of being a human, part of being a person is you're wearing the headset that projects time and space. So if you are a person, you have to be experiencing what we feel as and we experience time as. Even if you transcend to another state where you're not experiencing time in a linear fashion, at that point you can, like, during an ego death, but in that moment you aren't identified as a person. Your identity expands beyond just being a person. But if we're talking about being a person, you are necessarily kind of trapped into that realm of apparent space and time. So I think that space and time are illusions. But illusions are still real things. An illusion is just not what it appears to be. But as a human being, we experience what I think the eternal now. With the headset, we experience it as time and space. So I think, person is the key word there. As a person, you must be you must be in time, which means, you're experiencing the time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't really have too much more to say on that one, to be quite
Yeah, I
honest. I think that
think
that's pretty
that's
straightforward.
pretty cut and dry. I mean, I'm trying to think of the devil's advocate. What do you think about that? Is there any case you could make for devil's advocate there?
Honestly, I don't think so, just because of the word person. Like, there are things that I would want to say if I was forced to be devil's advocate, and if I was
Hmm.
forced to be devil's advocate, maybe I would bring up the like time travel aspect of it, or
Right.
the thing I said where, like, if you're in space and you're traveling at a certain time, like maybe you're not within the particular timeline that we're defining as time
Sure.
because you're breaking free of it in a certain way if you're
Hmm.
moving through it. I mean, you could say that,
Right.
but I
But
I just I still think you're still boxed into that
mhm.
linearity of time no matter what if you're a person.
And that being said, even if you time travel were to exist, and like you said, you'd be in a maybe a different timeline or a different place in time. That's the key word. You're still in time. Um, I think the one of the devil's advocate ideas that came to my head was like deep sleep, for instance, because in deep sleep you aren't experiencing time at all. You're in this timeless, eternal state. But also in deep sleep, you're not experiencing personhood. So
Exactly.
from your direct experience in deep sleep, you have no idea of being human or being a person at all. But so yeah, I think that's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I agree. All right, number 45. Can persons be analyzed in terms of person stages? So that's person dash stages. I don't even know what this means, to be
I
quite
don't
honest.
either. What is a person stage?
This might be like a metaphysical phrase that is above our, pay grade or something. But so this, I just put it in the chat GPT.
Okay.
So it says, in the context of spiritual growth and self development, personal stages refer to distinct phases or levels of individual evolution that people go through as they grow, learn, and transform. These stages often relate to how a person understands themselves, their relationships, their purpose, and their connection to the world or higher consciousness. I'm not sure it really understood, because that's kind of what I would have said too, but I think that it just seems like it's phrased a little differently.
Okay.
Person dash stages. I mean,
I mean, I can answer the question, which I mean, it says, can persons be analyzed in terms of person stages? And I think, of course, persons can be analyzed in that way. So you can analyze things however you would like. I mean, I don't know how valuable that is to do, but I mean, you can analyze someone based on, I don't know if it's asking their level of awareness or I don't know.
Would you say that the deepest and most accurate version of person analysis would be based off of their spiritual person stage? Like when you're looking at who they really are?
In that sense, probably. I mean, I think self-awareness, someone's self-awareness is key. I mean, I think that's like their core of their being. Um, I think that affects your behavior in all sorts of ways. Uh, the more you understand yourself and reality is going to affect how you interact with others, how you treat yourself. It's going to affect your mental health, your physical health. So I think it's very telling. So I think, analyzing somebody in that sense could be useful. I'm still not sure what exactly it's asking, but in those terms, I mean, sure.
Yeah, and if it is asking that, then I think it's most useful to analyze yourself in that way.
Agreed. And I think, yeah, that's far more important.
Mhm.
But in
We can move
analyzing
on if you want.
others, yeah, I mean, I would say in analyzing others, I don't know how useful that is to do, but let's move on.
All
Is it my
right.
turn?
Your turn.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Is the self a bundle of experiences?
That's
Is the
interesting.
self a bundle of experiences? That's a good question.
Bundle. No. Well, I mean, this says I'm gonna change this to be capital S
Mhm.
self because I think there's a difference when you speak about capital S self compared to lowercase s self. I'll just quick say both. So, in terms of capital S self, no, because I think the capital S self exists beyond experience. You can touch it, you can experience it. Your lowercase self can experience your uppercase self, but your uppercase self is not defined by the bundle of experiences. I do think that the lowercase self is, because the lowercase self is essentially an amalgamation of your experiences that formed and shaped your personality, your emotions, your subconscious, most likely as well, and all of the things that go into defining who you are as a person. So I think, yeah, I do think that the lowercase self is a bundle of experiences, but not the uppercase self.
Yeah, I basically agree with that. Like bundle of experiences is kind of strange. The way I look at it is I'm trying to boil everything down to like the direct experience, which the reality of it all we have is experience. There's no getting around it. That's all that there is. So I think to a degree you can say yes, the self is experiencing. There's no part of you that isn't experiencing. Um, so I'm not uh, fond of the bundle of experiences because I think that you are far more than just like a bundle of separate experiences, but in your deepest core, you are experiencing itself. I mean, that is what you are at all times. No matter what, you're always in a state of experiencing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So
And I think that,
fundamentally, I mean, you can kind of interchange experiencing with consciousness, experience with awareness. They're similar types of terms, and I think those are fundamental to what we experience as reality. So, to be a self, you must experience.
so you ready to move on, you think?
Yes.
All right. We're going to skip number 47 because it's a little weird and very similar to 46. So 48 is, do humans involve immaterial souls?
See, this is a tough one for me. Um, because the way I look at it is the word soul. Let's talk about that first. So, for me, I mean, the soul is a hard thing to define. I mean, all words are just pointing to something. So, what is that word actually pointing at? the soul? So most people I think would say something unique to you that is beyond your body or your physical existence. I don't know. What do you consider the soul?
I like to think of it as similarly to how we were discussing in the Latin, one of the previous questions, like the way that consciousness inhabits a body. I feel like there is a certain, and I'm going to talk about this in a physical way because it's the only way that we can really grab onto to things. But it's almost as if like it's my version, or it's like my consciousness, the
Hmm.
consciousness that inhibits my body. You know what
Okay.
I mean? The thing that connects me or tethers me to the ultimate version of what reality or existence or life or love is, or spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, whatever word you want to call it. It's like the thing that tethers each one of us individually to that thing. Because I do think that there is something that tethers our individuality to it. I think we have a responsibility as a species that can evolve to evolve in order for consciousness or intelligence itself to continue moving up the ladder of whatever it is it's trying to do, evolution of its own self, um and the soul it's a weird one because it a lot of people think of the soul as the higher self,
Right.
um or like the good inside you,
Hmm.
like the moral compass. But I still just kind of, in broader terms, consider it the thing that tethers your individuality to God.
Okay. See, I think we'll probably differ on this one, it's not like I totally disagree with everything you said. It's all reasonable and makes sense. But for me, I think the soul kind of it feels like an extension of the ego, or it's like something that you're trying to hold on to. It for me, it feels very similar to the ego. Whereas I think kind of what you're getting at with the soul is like that very thing that connects you to God, or that deepest aspect of yourself. I like to call it being. That's what feels right to me, like just your core, your very being. I think that is what people are talking about when they say soul. But I think the reason I have a problem with the whole soul concept is I think that that being that is that deepest part of you, the fundamental aspect of your experience and reality itself, I think it is all one shared being. So I don't think that there's a bunch of individual chopped up souls that have. I mean, this is kind of like a. I don't mean it to be like condescending, but that each have their own like personalities or unique existence. I think that for this experience and for this realm, we are all experiencing each other, but our very being, which is, I think, what people are pointing to when they think of a soul, is actually one shared being, which is God itself. So our very being is what connects us to God, and which is similar to what I think people are getting at when they say, "Oh, everything is one. We are all one." I think that gets misconstrued a lot and spoken out of term often, but I think that there's just like essentially one ultimate soul that is all shared, more so than each of us have a unique soul that is that transcends our physical bodies. I think it's more so it's one shared being that we all are, rather than we all have unique individual souls or consciousnesses. Like, I mean, I think consciousness comes up later soon, so I'll save that for when that comes up. But I seem to look at it more like an uber soul, than individual souls. But again, this is kind of where I started. It's like soul is just a word. So words are just it's a noise that we make that tries to point at something. I say the word and then you create the meaning in your head, it's just it's a noise, So I think soul is a complex word and a complex concept because people have their own version of it. And based on my experience of reality and experiences I've had and how I think about things, it's a tough one to grapple with as far as the unique soul, separating that from the ego and also the experience that you can have of oneness and transcendental states, things like that. Um, it's definitely fascinating and it's not something that I've like just throw away. I like to think about it, but I kind of land on souls really just being the one being. It's just the one aware presence inside of all of us. The one spark that brings your experience to life is the same spark in me. It's all the same thing.
So I think the reason that the soul is a slippery word and a slippery topic is because it forces us to grapple with the paradox of individuality and then also oneness, because I do think that it is both.
Hmm.
Because I think that there's us, our physical being, and then there's the oneness. And then in between those two things is
The
the
soul,
the place where the paradox lies, which is the soul.
right?
I think the soul includes the ego. I think the soul includes all of it, because I think, again, it's the thing that tethers us to the one, the all, the God, whatever you want to call it. So I think it just like forces us to grapple with the paradox of trying to find our individuality and where that lies within the relation to the oneness.
And another aspect of the question that used the word immaterial, which I think the most fundamental aspect of ourselves is immaterial. So the immaterial aspect is absolutely fundamental. And I think as soon as you want to think of an immaterial aspect of yourself, you want to grab onto the word soul because I mean, it makes sense. It's a good word in you know, conveying these ideas. But ultimately, I think that is kind of more of an ego driven thing. That's where I'm landing on it for now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do define it a little more toward the egocentric way. Because again, when we define it, it's a word, like you said, and when we try to define words, especially in metaphysical concepts, we have wiggle room, and
Hmm.
if you're wiggling toward more toward the physical ego driven definition of soul, then I could see where that could happen. Some people also go the other way and they wiggle a little bit more toward the divine definition of it. But I do think that ultimately, soul is, it's almost like defined by the person, by
Right.
the perceiver,
Like I said, it's a noise, and then
yeah.
you have to create the meaning when you hear the noise. And I don't, for me personally, I don't think it's a needed concept to define reality or my experience. I don't think it's like an individual soul isn't needed. I don't think that it's necessarily the concept of a soul isn't needed to tether me to the one being. I think the one being is inescapable, essentially, that it's really all that's there at all times. And it's just in this experience, this illusory experience, we don't always see it or have the awareness of ourselves to know what's actually happening. It's like um, if you're watching a movie on a screen, you imagine all the characters on the screen, they appear to be separate, but really their ultimate reality is the screen, and there's one screen. So it's like, even though they appear to be individual entities and their only reality is the one screen. They're made of the screen, it's that's similar to how I look at that the idea of an individual soul or ego versus the one. They're one in the same essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, and then you could say, just as you were talking about how, space and time are illusions, but illusions are real.
Right.
The characters might be part of the one, but they are still real
Yes.
at the same time.
But
So
their
it's like,
fundamental reality is the screen.
yes, yes, but that
Yes.
doesn't, it doesn't negate the reality of them themselves. And if the soul is the tether, then that is inescapable as well. It might not be, and that it's interesting when you say it's not needed. That's an interesting concept in itself because who is determining the need, and what are you then describing that where you don't need that part of it?
I don't think
It's
that
all
it's necessary, like, kind of like Occam's razor, the least assumptions needed in order to get to the truth. So I don't think it's needed to explain reality. I don't think that the closest thing, and this is where it gets difficult because everybody has a different idea of soul. But for me, it's too attached to ego. When I think of soul, it's just too much of like me as an individual, separate being, my humanity almost like my being. Like Joe has Joe's soul. Um, so I don't think it's necessarily needed, as in I think it's an assumption that doesn't have to be there, essentially.
Yeah. I
But I
kind of
could
take a different route where
yeah.
I don't discount it. And I think that it includes the ego because I do think that the ego is integral to who we are and what we are. I think it's more important than we give it credit for, because we're so stuck in it and we're so caught in it. And it is the source of so many of our problems. I think that we try, especially in our culture, and I know I do it myself too, to kill the ego or to dissolve the ego in order to experience what I consider to be ultimate reality. But then I realize that I'm doing that, like that in itself is an ego game. So
Well,
I
that's the
I
thing.
I I feel like placing yourself in the middle where both things, again, it's this paradox of, you know, the ego is part of the soul. The ego is an extension of God. The ego is God. So it's really hard to nail down what is and what isn't. I think it just all is.
Well, the idea isn't to kill the ego, it's just to identify it for what it is. It's the ego, that's just what it is, and that's not what you are. So you can't kill the ego. You can experience egolessness for like in our human life for short periods of time in transcendental states, but like our reality is we live with the tool of the ego. It's just that's not actually what you are. So your ego is essentially a tool. And I think that it's something on the screen, but that's what it is. It's part of the screen, but its fundamental reality is the screen. And if there's a soul, then it's just another thing on the screen. I could see that as well, but um, for me, I think it depends how many layers you're going deep, really.
Yeah, especially using, I mean, and you could use that analogy of like maybe the the screen is the soul and the writers and the producers of the show are God or something. You know what I mean? Like you could
Mhm.
really expand that metaphor out too. But um yeah,
But
I don't know.
and this is where I come down on it, like foremost is I have never experienced a soul. So like I can't say it's real if I've never experienced it. It's just another concept added to my lexicon to maybe like convey ideas, but they're so conceptual and abstract that it doesn't sit with me, like it's not part of my direct experience of reality. So that's where, like, for me it just seems like the another layer of the ego. um that's the best way I can describe it, the way I think of it, at least. Not to say that there isn't I mean, wild states that you can experience, like your mind, consciousness is infinite, you can experience infinite things, but I don't know if there's an actual thing that is the soul.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
And I think that there are some people out there that would describe some experiences that they've had as nothing but their soul. So again, it's experience is king, as we always
right.
say. And this is just a description of a potential experience, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
I mean, it's an interesting concept. I mean, I've thought about it deeply, you know,
yeah,
whether or
me
not
too.
there is even a soul or what it is if there is a soul, and it's constantly evolving in my mind as well. So I'm open to to anything that could potentially form and color my interpretation of the soul.
And I just think that it boils down to whether the soul is shared or individualized. And I think the word soul in itself implies individualized. That's why I kind of reject the word soul. I think when people are talking about the soul, that what they're getting at exists, but it's not individual. It is shared among us. So that is basically just God. It's the most fundamental aspect of us and our reality. So instead of
But don't you think it can be both though, or it can be your piece of reality or of God? Because it almost seems like even okay, so if you take the concept of like past lives, so
Mhm,
what is, I think people think of the soul as the thing that connects all of your lives as well. Because, like, in order to remember a past life, there would have to be something in there that continues, but
right, but
something that continues that you hold on to, that you keep, that exists outside of your physical body, your physical life, your physical death, even. And I think that might be what the tether is, like the tether between you and all of your lives, if that does exist.
this is like, as human beings, we have our concepts and then we project them onto nature. Like possession isn't inherent in nature. It's a human concept. Possession, like we always want, like we I use this with consciousness, like my consciousness. Possession isn't it's a human concept. So I think even with like past lives, to say those are mine, you're grabbing it for the ego, I think. That's why I think it kind of boils down to ego. I mean, you can experience past lives, and that's an experience you can have, and it's real because you experience it. But that doesn't mean that it belongs to you. I think that is a human conception, just the idea of possession in itself. I don't think possession is fundamentally inherent in nature or in reality. I think that is a human idea or something of the ego.
Yeah, yeah. I I often feel that myself. But then again, when I do think about the past lives thing, what is it then that connects one to their future and past lives? And also, I think of like the Hindu and Buddhist concepts of like karma, and the fact that like the rebirth and reincarnation concepts depend upon what you do in your life, say. Um, and if there is something that connects you to your future incarnation, that could be considered the soul, that
Hmm.
constant thing. Because I think there is, because, possession might not be a human concept. Possession might be a concept that exists beyond our understanding, that we're grasping, from afar. I understand why you would say that possession is a human concept, because it definitely seems that way. But
Yeah,
it's
like
even possible that we're being inspired by our future incarnations,
I don't.
and that's how we understand
Mhm.
possession as a whole. I mean, who knows?
But I don't think ownership is real. I think it's an agreed upon thing. Like your
Well,
car,
ownership might not be the right way to describe it. Like, I understand, like, your car, yes, that's ownership, but I
anything,
don't think I think the soul owns you more than you own it.
like
You
the
know what I
soul
mean?
owns the ego.
More so than you would own the soul.
Sure,
Yeah.
that would make sense. But it
Yeah,
all, kind of boils down to my this is my grief with it all. Is it shared? Is there one? Or are they unique amongst individual human beings?
I think it's both.
And
I think
I
it's both.
I think with past lives and all that, it's all possible if it's shared. I mean, if the being that you are is the being that I am, then all you could it's all you essentially. It is all the one consciousness, the one aware presence, the one being that experiences all. I think it could be, and of course you could experience past lives because it's you. There's nothing separating you from it or any other life. There's just, it's going to all be that being that is yourself. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I beat this to death. I just, it's a question of, are they individualized or is it a shared immaterial thing? And I think it's a shared immaterial thing, but I do understand where you're coming from, where there could be a layer in between where there is some individualized aspect. Like I totally get that. And it could be, but right now that's where I'm leaning.
Yeah, it's really a great question.
Yeah.
I really, really
The
do
soul is
love to think about it.
fascinating. And I
It
know
so
that
is,
you
yeah.
think about it a little differently than I do. So this is a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I like when we have just like slight
Yeah.
differences in opinion on these
'Cause I
things.
get it too, and it's such a fascinating one to think about. It's yeah, it's a toughie.
Yeah.
Is it
Um,
my turn?
I don't even remember, dude.
I think you asked me.
Okay.
Um, okay. Do humans involve any properties that are not reducible to the properties that characterize the inanimate world? Do humans involve any properties that are not reducible to the properties that characterize the inanimate world?
Yep.
And this
Period.
is kind of what we were just talking about a bit, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm gonna say it's essentially asking if there's something that exists beyond the material world, because
Right.
inanimate meaning inanimate objects, and
Physical.
it's almost as if like, are you defining humans and life based off of just the inanimacy, if that's a word, of the physical being? But yeah, absolutely, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there are an infinite amount of properties that are irreducible.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, 100%.
And, I think in our culture with, like, with reductionism, I think we kind of look at it through one lens, like what we always do as a our world is surrounded around the metaphysical reality, well, not reality, but we look at reality through the materialist lens, the physicalist lens, that there is a physical world, we are all physical beings in space and time, this and that's all there is to it. And then we want to use reductionism to just reduce things to the smallest piece of matter. And I think for a while I was like totally anti-reductionism then. I was like, because it's stupid to do that. I don't think something can you necessarily learn something about the whole by reducing it to its smallest part. But reductionism is great if you think of it in a different way, as in like reducing the complex to the simple. Reducing things not just based off of physical properties, um, which is what I think is always just the first thing you think about with reductionism. So reductionism can be great when you're reducing, complex to simple. I think that's great to do. But to just pick something apart, like physical matter, and reduce that and think you're going to figure it all out, I think is the wrong approach. And as far
Yeah.
as, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and yeah, and it can also be very useful because when you reduce something down to its smallest parts and you have a higher understanding of its function, then you can extrapolate in the other
Hmm.
direction, and then you can
Sure.
start to understand things as a whole a little more than you would have if you didn't reduce that thing down to its
Right.
parts to understand its function.
It's absolutely useful. I mean, it's all of our sciences. It definitely has its application. But, I think physicalists get stuck on it, when it comes to their metaphysics. They wanna look at the smallest parts and then just reduce everything down in physical terms. But this question kind of goes into the last question, is the immaterial part, like, is there a soul? It can That's irreducible. I would say you can't reduce how was it worded? Let me look at that
Do
one.
humans involve any properties that are not reducible to the properties that characterize the inanimate world? So, I
And
mean,
see,
to me,
it's
it's such
using
an
the word
easy.
humans too, which is can be interesting. Um, but essentially, I would think you can't yeah, it's basically what you said, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think this is like essentially number 48, but
Right. Yeah,
a
it's pretty
different.
much
Yeah.
kind of what we just went into.
And honestly, I think we should move on because this next question might be the last question we even get to because
Okay.
it's gonna be a while, I think. And the question is one of our favorites, and that is, what is consciousness?
Oh man, where to begin? Um,
And I'm glad that I'm asking you this first.
yeah. See, I'm gonna try to reduce the complex to the simple. Um, so consciousness, I would say the simplest thing you can say is awareness. I think it is aware presence. It is presence, meaning it is inescapable, it is always present, and it is always aware. I look at reality and my metaphysical framework, not materialism or physicalism. I struggle to even say idealism right now. Idealism meaning that reality is mind, because the dualism with matter and mind, I'd like to call it consciousness first now, the consciousness first model. I heard that and I think that defines it better. So it's like you get the trifecta: mind, matter, consciousness first. So um meaning that we look at reality in a sense of, like, there's how many people on earth now, like 8 billion or something. So like the standard model is there are 8 billion consciousnesses and one physical world. And this is just, I'm trying to make it super simple. But imagine that instead of there being 8 billion consciousnesses and one physical world, that there's one consciousness and 8 billion worlds. Essentially, that there is one consciousness, and then it's all, then each individual perception of the world. So the reason we see the same world out there isn't because there is a one single physical world out there. It's because we have a shared consciousness, a shared being. So essentially, consciousness is awareness, it's aware presence. I think it's the fundamental, consciousness first model. I think that you could say it's the word that is indescribable. It is God. It is love. It's that thing that really you can't put to words, but it is fundamental. I mean, and especially if it contains all of reality, which I think is obvious. I mean, you've never experienced anything outside of consciousness. Everything that's ever experienced is within consciousness. That's just unavoidable. That's another issue with the materialist paradigm. They want to say that there's 8 billion consciousnesses as far as human beings go and one physical world out there, but that one physical world has never been experienced, because matter is supposed to exist outside of consciousness. We have yet to find this matter, because any matter that is experienced within consciousness. um I think there's a great definition of consciousness, and I don't want to mess it up. I want to read it for you because I think this is the best definition. I might have stated it on this podcast before, but it gets to the point of, it's as a word, it's you can't define it, but you can try to express something that brings it about within whoever you're conveying the message to. So it is as such: consciousness is that with which our experience is known. It is that within which everything appears, and it is that out of which everything is made, and of which everything is the activity. I think that's Rupert Spira. I think that is the fullest definition of consciousness that could possibly be stated. I mean, there's metaphors that can be used to also evoke this. There's um, a lot that can be said, but I think that is the best definition. Everything appears within it, everything is made of it. You can think of what I said before, the screen example, the movie on the screen. The movie is like our experience, this what we have here, but everything is made of the screen. Everything is appearing on the screen. The movie is an activity of the screen. Consciousness is the screen. It is the fundamental aspect of reality. It's inescapable. It is being it when I talk about, the shared thing between us, the very core, the soul, may I say, of our being, you know, th- it is consciousness.
I love that. And man, when you were reading that, I heard it in Rupert's voice.
It's
What an absolute
perfect.
G. He's the
Seriously.
man. That guy just gets it.
He does.
Now, if I because I honestly I do think that his definition is the perfect definition.
Mhm.
But if I'm gonna just sort of talk about what I think consciousness is, I think that it is the driving force behind life. I think consciousness just is. I think when we think of isness,
Yeah.
that's just what consciousness is.
Mhm.
I think consciousness is God. And I think that it is what permeates and drives everything to be what it is. I think it is in, through, and all around all things. And it creates all things. It is creation itself. I think that if you want to discuss and talk about our relation to consciousness as individual entities, I think it is if it is the field that connects us through time and space. Um, it makes me think of just paradox in general. And
Mhm.
when I think of it, it almost makes me think that we are discovering consciousness through quantum mechanics. And
Mhm.
let me explain that just a little more. So I think that what consciousness is, or the way that it presents itself in the material physical world, is through paradox. And the discovery of quantum mechanics is the discovery of paradox. We're literally discovering the way that paradox trickles itself into our physical reality in terms of particles and waves um, being fundamentally like happening in the same at the same time. Something can be a particle and a wave at the same time. Also, with superposition, things that um, affect like one particle will affect another instantaneously, and the distance between them does not matter. These things, they make no sense in the physical paradigm because I believe that what we're touching is paradox. And when we touch paradox, I think what we're doing is we are weaseling our way into discovering, or maybe not discovering, but experiencing consciousness. Maybe we are discovering it. I think maybe we are, because when we start to go into what quantum mechanics is and what paradox is, the fact that it doesn't make sense and it breaks down everything that is in our material world, I think that we are starting to touch what we are defining as consciousness, what that thing is.
And it's fascinating because with quantum mechanics, it's like a lot of the founders, they basically said what you're saying there. A lot of the founders of quantum mechanics were like, wow, we just discovered like this blows the materialist paradigm out of the water. It's all rubbish now. And they all of a sudden became like mystics. A lot of these guys, like a lot of them, a lot of the founders. And see, but we're so attached to the materialist paradigm that like we created like the many worlds theory now. Like we have to create something that fits the materialist paradigm to explain this unexplainable thing. And I totally agree. It's like when you're looking at quantum mechanics, it's just like a wink at you that paradox is inherent within reality. that it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's part of this thing, and that's the beauty of it also. It's without paradox, I mean, where's the mystery? I mean, we talk about the mystery. I mean, consciousness being what it is, and, living through this paradigm, the consciousness first, seeing things that way, it just opens up reality in a way that's not, you can't experience it when you limit yourself down to the physical paradigm. I think coming to this realization that consciousness is fundamental, that reality is not just physical matter, it opens up the mystery. And I think with psychedelics, it's one of the most amazing things that you can get through psychedelics. I mean, it psychedelics will show you that at the very least, if you take it seriously, at the very least, it'll show you that reality is not what you thought it was, and that you are not what you thought you were. And then you follow that rabbit hole; it's infinite. I think it's worth saying that consciousness is infinite and eternal. So it's beyond space and time. I'd say it's dimensionless. It can't be confined in any way that the human mind can try to twist and grapple with. It's just totally beyond the human mind. So you can't know it like we know facts or concepts. The only way to be in touch with it is to actually be it. So that's why for me, certain words work better for certain people and evoking that feeling or that like touching it. And for me, it's being. That's why I use the word being a lot. I think awareness is a good one too, but just pure being is what consciousness is, pure being. And at the same time, paradoxically, consciousness is everything. It's whatever is being presented to you is just an activity of consciousness. So, I through what I've found is the the easiest way to get in touch with that is through, you know, doing the work that we always talk about, studying it, and then contemplation, some meditation, breath work, all that other stuff, and then bringing that to the psychedelic state. It just really opens up all these doors, and you can just continue to go deeper into it. And then you realize that consciousness truly is infinite. I mean, and for me, what I love about psychedelics so much is that through having those experiences, coming back to my standard, human state of mind, you can bring those ideas back and see that they still exist here. So, like, you can close your eyes and experience the infinite depth of consciousness. You can, if you close your eyes and try to find an end to consciousness, you cannot do it. You simply that it is infinite and you are constantly experiencing the infinite. There's no edge. It's just awareness. It's purely open. I also like to say with consciousness that it's like a big yes. It is openness. Your ego is what's fighting all the things that you think are negative, and you want to say no and resist things. That's not consciousness. Consciousness is purely open, and it lets everything in without any rejection at all. It is just yes, yes, yes. Just enter me and I'll experience whatever comes with no rejection. And then that's, I think, a lot of people that you would see and maybe call like enlightened or people that really get it. I think that is what somehow they have really got to that place where they're in touch with their pure being, their consciousness so much that they are just pure openness and just they are so aware of their ego and not identifying with it that they are just open to experience happening. Where, the more that you are stuck in your ego and identifying with the ego, the more you want to control things and reject things that come your way. Whereas consciousness, pure, open awareness is just welcoming all.
Yeah, man, very well said. Um, I'll just sort of say, I mean, I just think Consciousness, like when you were talking, I think you could have replaced the word consciousness every single time you said it with God.
Yeah,
It
man.
just is God, you
Mhm.
know? That's just the human word for it. It's the only word we have. I mean,
Yeah.
we have words like source, which I
Mhm.
love because source is the it does it brings it to the origination of
Mhm.
all, you know? But I think God encompasses more than what we can specify.
Right.
And when you think about consciousness, like to me, it's God. It is everything. It is all things. Again, in, through, and all around. And I think the people that you're talking about that inhabit this openness, if you ask them if they believe in God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, they're not going to be atheists.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do think that the path toward climbing the ladder that ascends into higher levels of consciousness, because I do believe that there are lower levels of consciousness and higher levels of consciousness. And I think what defines the higher levels of consciousness is exactly what you said, the openness.
Mhm.
And also that word love.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Consciousness and love are directly intertwined and directly connected. And I think that is why love is like the fundamental value that that w- progresses all life, the consummation of children,
Mhm.
the continuing of the species, the underlying motivation for all of those things
All that is
is
good.
love,
Yeah.
for all that is good.
Mhm.
And I think that when you, and also, you speak about the psychedelic experience, and again, these open and very enlightened people, they all inhabit a very, very high level of love. You
Mhm.
talk about, like, when you hear Ramdas talk about his guru, and when he would be around his guru, what he would feel coming from him is just unconditional compassion and love. And it would break him down, and he would just be a puddle of tears
They
in the presence
emanate
of
it.
that thing. Yes. And when you're in the presence of that pure love, that is, I think, a direct route to experiencing a higher level of consciousness that peeks through our reality, and it wants to grab us and bring it into itself. I think consciousness wants to evolve the human or the monkey or the dog or the dinosaur, any
Mhm.
living being that has ever existed. I think consciousness has a drive or a desire, maybe through love and openness, to grab us and bring it into its dimension, its world, whatever you want to say, its realm, in order to, I mean, who knows what its motivation would be, but
I
it almost feels like it wants to evolve itself through us, because we are it and it is us and we are all one, and it's the creative force of everything, of complexity.
I think a lot of what you're saying there also can be said as consciousness is intelligence too. It's like certain, like, it's inherent within the thing. It's built in. Like when I see reality, I see intelligence. It's perfect. It's harmony. I think peace is a very good word to equate with consciousness. Total peace, and that's like a lot of these people like Ram Dass, etc. They emanate peace, and also with this level of awareness and their understanding of the ego and their true nature, it allows them to, like, the level of compassion that they have, I think, is what you're feeling a lot if you're around one of these people, because if one of these people has the true understanding that they are not separate, they're not other than you. There's no other. They see themselves as one with you. So it's your levels of empathy skyrocket. See, none of this stuff that we're talking about, you can't get any of this through the physicalist paradigm. It doesn't go anywhere in any of these directions, and it's I think it has the opposite effect. It has like some type of nihilistic effect in a sense, and it's like I think it's not healthy. Um, and there's no really good aspect of the materialist worldview because everything we're saying, this metaphysics that we are discussing, the consciousness first, it doesn't change anything. Like this paradigm still applies to all of our physical science, all the stuff that we do, like all the technology we create, all this stuff, it still applies. It's not like having this worldview changes all the good stuff that we have done through this materialist paradigm. Um, but I think acknowledging reality as having a true core that is loving, that you are directly not even connected with, but like you are it. You're not separate. You're not like a separate physical guy in some physical universe. You are nature. There's no separation. You are in it. You're not some we like to think of ourselves as separate things in a physical system that, I am this and everything else is other, but it is all nature. We are all just nature, really. I think you could use the word nature for consciousness also. See, if you, consciousness is everything, so there are a lot of words you can use that like definitely fit in with its meaning. Um, but I think, it's about time that people start investigating this more. I mean, I like to think about the implications of what this type of worldview could bring to people, all the terrible things that happen in the world, and just, how people behave, I think would change dramatically if we didn't have this kind of nihilistic metaphysics hanging over us as because this is worldwide, this physicalist paradigm. I mean, you have niche other worldviews. And then you have like some religions who are kind of halfway in between. They believe in some type of divinity, but still, I think most of these people are living through a materialist lens, seeing divinity as something that is separate from them or something that's waiting for them in the afterlife rather than something that is surrounding them and bursting from within them that's always here and accessible at any given moment.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. What I'll say, just to sort of end my, answer to what is consciousness, I think it is in, through, and all around everything. It is, as you said, um, it's healing. I
Hmm.
think that it heals uh, the ailments of the materialist paradigm that we are so far stuck in. Um, it's balancing, grounding, harmonizing. It is the ebb and flow of all things.
Hmm.
And I really like the concept of harmony because it's like harmony through complexity. And I think that's very it's a beautiful thing,
Hmm.
and when you can take a psychedelic or when you can sit and meditate and you can experience a little piece of it, I think that's what's going to bring the healing to, all of the problems, all the things that you were saying. I think that we're taking baby steps,
We are.
um, and we've taken some really large leaps backward in our history.
Mhm,
And I think with all of these leaps backward, now, this is part of the responsibility of our soul, our individual
yeah.
souls to take the steps forward,
Well,
uh, to grasp, and allow consciousness in so that we can heal all this shit that we're seeing happening in the world.
that's you said the word responsibility, and that's what was going through my head also. It seems that it's our responsibility as humans. I mean, we are so different than everything else. We have the ability to, craft reality, and we have the intelligence to investigate the mystery. So it's like I feel like it's our responsibility to bring harmony in a way that it seems like we're kind of doing the opposite of that sometimes now. And we have the ability to do incredible things And I think it starts with the understanding of ourself, and in doing that, the understanding of reality as a whole. Then we can, some people think this is what some of the ancients were doing. We can bring some like the hermetic concepts down into reality, as above, so below. We can try to bring harmony in ways that right now it's just not really what we're thinking about. It seems like most of our innovation is purely based off of a profit motive. It'd be interesting to see if we had a motive of just empathy and love, all the things we're talking about, what kind of things human beings would be able to create and do.
Yeah, and it's our birthright as far as I'm concerned as well. You know,
Hmm.
it is a responsibility, but it's also a birthright because it's difficult, but it's also beautiful and we need to do it. We need to investigate these things. We need to do it. And I think we are, as Terrence McKenna would say, I think the plants are the stewards, Earth's stewards of consciousness, and I think they're in charge and they are guiding the earth and its consciousness through this labyrinth that we call life. And I think we're headed toward the right direction, man. I think the future looks bright.
Indeed.